So now we start off with facts of growth with chapter 1. Fact number 1 is that there's variation in GDP per capita. There's enormous variation in GDP per capita across economies. The real GDP per capita being the GDP divided by the population. The GDP per worker being the GDP divided by the labor force. And this is an indicator of productivity. And we look at things like labor force participation, average annual growth rate, and years to double the current GDP per capita. Fact number 2 is that there's variation in growth rates. The rates of growth in GDP per capita and GDP per worker vary substantially across countries, and the years it'll take to double the current GDP per capita is equal to 70 divided by G, so 70 divided by the country's average annual growth rate. Fact number 3 is that growth rates aren't necessarily constant. Growth rates were close to zero but increased sharply in the 19th and 20th centuries, so growth is a modern phenomenon, and for individual countries, growth rates also change over time. And then fact number 4 is that there's always a relative position. A country's relative position in the world distribution of GDP per capita isn't unchangeable. Countries can move from being rich to poor and vice versa. And then fact number 5 consists of 4 points, and these are Kaldor's stylized facts and general characteristics of most economies in the long run, and they're mainly features of the US economy. So the first thing is that the average growth rate of GDP per capita has been positive and relatively constant. The second thing is that the real rate of return on capital shows no trend. The share of GDP earned by labor compensation shows no trend, so wages show no trend. And then the share of GDP spent on capital formation shows no trend. So we should know growth and development are associated with policy implementation. Political institutions make rules that will foster economic institutions, and economic institutions create incentives for growth factors to thrive. Now we move on to Solow's growth model with chapter 2. So remember, a model is a mathematical representation or simplification of some aspects or facts of a particular economy. So it isolates the facts that we want to observe. First, let's take a look at the assumptions of the Solow model. Well, the first assumption is that the countries of the world produce and consume a single and homogeneous good, Y, output or GDP. So there's no international trade. Another assumption is that technology is exogenous, so technology isn't affected by what firms do. So the R&D sector isn't part of the model. Another assumption is that individuals save a constant fraction of their income and spend a constant fraction of their time accumulating skills or acquiring human capital. And so the Solow model is based on two equations, the production function and the capital accumulation equation. And so in the Solow model, capital YT, GDP, is equal to KAT, capital, multiplied by A and L. AT being the total factor productivity or the measure of productivity or technology, and then LT being the labor and T being at a point in time. And A and L being bracket to the power of 1 minus A being a share from 0 to 1. And we should know labor may become more productive if technology is available. And the assumption is that labor can use this technology. So there's labor augmenting or Harrod neutral. And here the production function follows Cobb-Douglas form and exhibits constant returns to scale, CRS. So if we double inputs, outputs double too. And we should know that technology, A, depends on the initial level of technology in the economy, A0, and the growth rate of technology, GA. So AT, technology at a point in time, is equal to A0 multiplied by E to the power of GAT, so the growth rate of technology at a point in time. And then labor depends on the initial level of the population in the economy, L0, and the growth rate of labor, GL. So LT, labor at a point in time, is equal to L0 multiplied by E to the power of GLT, the growth rate of labor at a point in time. So we assume there are a large number of firms in the economy, so the firms operate under perfect competition and are price takers. So pi t, profit, is equal to YT, GDP, minus WT times LT, so the wages multiplied by the labor, minus RK, so the real interest rate multiplied by capital. And so firms will hire labor until the marginal product of labor, MPL, is equal to wages paid, W, and the MPK, the marginal product of capital, is equal to R, the rental price of capital. So wages, WT, is equal to 1 minus A multiplied by YT over LT, so output divided by labor. And then the real interest rate or rental price of capital, RT, is equal to A multiplied by YT divided by KT, so output divided by capital. And so the GDP per capita, small yt, is equal to capital YT, so GDP or output, divided by LT, so labor. And this is equal to KAT multiplied by AL to the power of 1 minus A divided by LT. And then finally we find that the GDP per capita, small yt, is equal to KT divided by AL to the power of A, all multiplied by AT, or technology. And this function exhibits diminishing marginal returns. And from this we find that the GDP per capita depends not only on how much capital and technology or productivity there is in the economy at a given time, but also depends on the ratio KT divided by AL, so the capital per worker to technology, or the capital per efficiency unit of labor. So the economy can have a higher GDP per capita by increasing the ratio KT over AL or increasing AT, or productivity. And to express GDP per capita in growth terms, so economic growth, we take the logs and derivatives of the GDP per capita production function. So we find that log yt is equal to A multiplied by log kt divided by AL plus log AT. And then this is equal to A multiplied by log kt minus log AT minus log LT plus log AT. And then we find that d log yt divided by dt is equal to 1 dy divided by y multiplied by dt is equal to gy. And then we finally find that the growth rate of GDP per capita, or economic growth, is equal to A bracket multiplied by gk, the growth rate of capital, minus ga, the growth rate of technology, minus gl, the growth rate of labor, plus ga, the growth rate of technology. But now let's talk about the capital accumulation equation. So here dk is equal to it minus dkt, d being the rate of depreciation and k being capital and I being investment. And this can be simplified to sy minus dk, SI being the savings rate and Y being the output. So the equation tells us that the change in capital stock is equal to the amount of investment, SY, and this is a constant fraction of income that workers save, and depreciation, dk, the constant fraction of capital that depreciates every period during the production processes. But now to calculate the growth rate of capital, gk, it's equal to si multiplied by yt divided by kt minus d. And this can be simplified to si multiplied by al divided by k to the power of 1 minus a minus d. So the growth rate of capital is equal to the savings rate multiplied by technology and labor divided by capital to the power of 1 minus a minus the rate of depreciation. So the growth rate of capital depends on the investment rate, the size of the labor force, the level of technology, capital stock, and the depreciation of capital stock. And it's difficult to produce new capital if there's already very large capital stock, KT, in relation to the productivity of labor, and if depreciation occurs at a faster rate than the investment rate. If productivity of labor is large relative to capital stock available, that allows the economy to produce more capital. Diminishing returns are still a constraint to growth though. But now let's take a look at things in the steady state. So in the steady state or balanced growth path, changes in inputs are zero, so capital and labor are growing at a constant rate. So GK is equal to GA plus GL, so the growth rate of capital is equal to the growth rate of technology and labor. And then we expand this to SI multiplied by AL divided by K to the power of 1 minus A minus D is equal to GA plus GL. So we simply substituted the growth rate of capital equation. And then from there we find the capital per worker in the steady state. So K divided by AL in the steady state is equal to SI divided by GA plus GL plus D all to the power of 1 divided by 1 minus A. So capital per worker, or K divided by AL, is equal to the savings rate divided by the growth rate of technology, labor, and the rate of depreciation to the power of 1 divided by 1 minus A. So in the steady state, higher investments increase the ratio of capital to productivity and labor. So K divided by A and L. If population growth, productivity, and depreciation rates grow faster than the rate of investments, the ratio of capital to productivity and labor, so K divided by A and L, will be lower. So when solving for GDP per capita in the steady state, we find small yt BGP, so the GDP per capita along the balanced growth path, is equal to SI divided by GA plus GL plus D all to the power of A divided by 1 minus A multiplied by AT. So the GDP per capita along the balanced growth path is equal to the savings rate divided by the growth rate of technology, labor, plus the depreciation rate, all to the power of a divided by 1 minus a multiplied by technology, at. So this shows us that countries with higher savings or investment rates, SI, and higher levels of technology, A, will tend to be richer, ceteris paribus. These countries are accumulating more capital per worker and therefore have more output per worker. Countries with high population growth rates and high capital depreciation rates tend to be poorer. And we can use the Solow diagram to explain the steady-state properties, so the dynamics of the K divided by A and L ratio. And you should know if the growth rate of capital curve, GK, and the growth rate of technology and labor meet, so GA and GL, that's where the steady state occurs. But now let's take a look at the Solow diagram to show us the dynamics of the capital to productivity and labor ratio. So on the y-axis, you'll have the growth rate, and then on the x-axis, you'll have the capital to productivity and labor ratio. So the curve starting from the top going down is the growth rate of capital curve, which is equal to S multiplied by A and L divided by K to the power of 1 minus A minus D. And then the flat horizontal curve is the growth rate of technology and labor curve, so GA plus GL. And where these two curves meet gives us the steady state, so K over AL SS. And on the left-hand side, the capital to productivity and labor ratio is rising, and on the right-hand side, it's falling. So if the growth rate of capital is less than the growth rate of technology and labor, then the ratio K over AL is falling. The rate at which capital is growing or accumulating is slower than the rate at which A and L is growing, so the economy grows at a slower rate, i.e. it moves back to its steady state. But then if the growth rate of capital is larger than the growth rate of technology and labor, then the ratio K over AL, so the capital to productivity and labor ratio, will increase. The rate at which capital is growing or accumulating is faster than the rate at which A and L is growing, so the economy grows at a faster rate. But now let's take a look at comparative statics. So these are used to examine the response of the model to changes in parameters or exogenous variables. So we consider the following shocks: an increase in the capital formation rate, so an increase in the investment rate, or a decrease in the population rate, so a decrease in L, or vice versa affecting S and L. So now let's take a look at what happens in the model if we have an increase in investments or an increase in the savings rate, SI. So again, we'll have the growth rate on the y-axis and the capital to technology and labor ratio on the x-axis. We have the growth rate of capital curve going down and the growth rate of technology and labor curve as a flat horizontal line intersecting it, and where they intersect being the old or initial steady state. And now if there's an increase in investment or the savings rate, the growth rate of capital curve shifts upward, and now the capital to productivity and labor ratio is increased to the right, resulting in a new higher steady state. And then the opposite happens if there's a decrease in investment. The growth rate of capital curve shifts downward and the K over AL ratio decreases, shifting to the left. And if we were to look at the transitional growth from this increase in the savings rate, it would be a parallel shift up. And we should know that policy changes in the Solow model increase growth rates, but only temporarily along the transition to the new steady state. So policy changes in the Solow model therefore have no growth effect and only level effects. So economies can transition to low GDP per capita to high and vice versa. But now let's take a look at what happens in the diagram if we have a decline in the population growth. For example, China's one-child policy. So again, on the y-axis, you'll have the growth rate, and on the x-axis, you'll have the ratio of capital to technology and labor. The growth rate of capital curve goes down as usual, and then we'll have a flat horizontal growth rate of technology and labor curve. And now, if there's a decline in population growth or there's a decrease in GL, the flat horizontal curve will now shift downward, moving down along the GK curve, leading to the K over AL ratio increasing from old to new. So because of this decrease in population growth, the capital to technology and labor ratio is now increased. And the opposite would happen if the population growth would increase. The steady state will actually decrease. So countries with a K over AL ratio below their steady states will grow rapidly until the K over AL ratio reaches its steady state where the ratio is constant. Countries exhibit sustained economic growth in the Solow model through technology, so productivity growth, which offsets the diminishing returns of capital and population growth. The weakness of the model is that technology enters exogenously, so it only offsets diminishing returns to capital and population growth temporarily. Now we move on to the empirical applications of the Solow model with Chapter 3. So one example we can look at is how after World War II, Germany's GDP per capita fell below its balanced growth path ratio. Its capital to productivity and labor ratio was below the steady state, so it experienced high growth in capital, which generated transitional growth to get back to its balanced growth path. Another example is rapid growth in East Asia. Adopting open policies, increased savings rate, and low population growth saw South Korea transition from a low to high steady state. We're still not sure if China has reached this new steady state though. So when taking a look at cross-country differences in GDP per capita, so far these case studies for individual countries confirm Solow's predictions that for countries to transition from low to high GDP per capita, they need to have a growing capital formation, GK, driven by high investment rates, SI, and low population growth rates, GL. But now let's talk a bit about convergence and explaining differences in growth rates. While backward or poor countries tend to grow faster than rich countries in order to close the gap between the two groups, this catch-up phenomenon is called convergence. Countries with lower initial GDP per capita, like back in 1870, have been growing faster over time, so Japan and Finland, compared to those with high initial GDP per capita, like the UK and Australia, who have low growth rates. However, when we use a larger sample, a cross-section of countries all over the world, the convergence isn't so clear. There's a lack of unconditional convergence. So the prediction of the model is that countries with similar steady-state properties, for example, similar levels of technology, the same rates of investment, same population growth rates, etc., will experience transitional growth. And this is known as conditional convergence. And conditional convergence holds for countries with similar steady-state properties, for example, OECD versus SADC countries. Unconditional convergence may not hold because poor countries don't have similar steady-state properties to rich countries. Rich countries may start at different positions, but they're all headed towards a similar steady state, for example, the US, Germany, and Japan. The same holds for developing countries, for example, Botswana and South Africa. Transitory growth is related to how far a country is from their steady state. So the further an economy is below its steady state, the faster the economy will grow. And the further an economy is above its steady state, the slower the economy will grow. Some possible reasons for countries being below or above their steady states is civil wars, so destruction of capital, mismanagement of the economy, like hyperinflation, oil prices, so abnormal revenues in the short run, skill accumulation, higher investment in technology, etc. If convergence is taking place, we should see the gap between the poor and the rich countries getting smaller. Now we move on to Chapter 4 with the economics of ideas. So some of the shortcomings of the Solow model is that it doesn't model technology. It's assumed to be exogenous at a rate g. And the Solow model exhibited diminishing marginal returns, which meant countries could only grow up to their steady state. And the solution to this is Romer's model. So it's a framework that incorporates technology or endogenizes technology that allows for increasing returns to scale, IRS, that can explain sustained economic growth. So technology is how inputs are transformed in the production process to produce output. Ideas improve the technology of production. A new idea allows the inputs to produce more or better output. Ideas improve the technology index, A. So the framework is as follows. We have ideas, and these are non-rivalrous. This leads to increasing returns, and this leads to imperfect competition. So why are ideas non-rivalrous? Well, they're not excludable as most economic goods. And once an idea is created, anyone with knowledge of the idea can take advantage of it. But ideas can also be partially excludable. The excludability depends on whether the owner can charge a fee for its use or not. Copyrights and patents grant investors or scientists the right to charge a fee for the use of their ideas. For example, Windows software. And these institutions impose a certain degree of excludability on ideas. Goods that are non-rivalrous and non-excludable involve substantial spillovers or externalities of benefits that are not captured by producers. Goods with positive spillovers tend to be underproduced. Those with negative spillovers are overproduced. Rivalrous goods need to be produced each time they're sold. For example, phones, laptops, etc. Non-rivalrous goods need to be produced only once. The first unit produced will involve high fixed costs, but as more units are produced from one idea, average costs decrease. So on a graph of costs on the y-axis and units produced on the x-axis, we'll have a cost function with increasing returns to scale. And as you can see, the average cost decreases as more units are produced. then the marginal cost is a flat horizontal curve and it's constant. So the average cost decreases as output increases, and therefore this is increasing returns to scale. The price needs to be larger than the marginal cost, so P needs to be bigger than MC. And this is a necessary condition to serve as an incentive for firms to produce the idea so that they can make profits, so imperfect competition. But now let's talk a bit about intellectual property rights. So for ideas to exist, inventors need institutions that create incentives for them to be innovative. Ideas are non-rivalrous and non-excludable, so they generate positive spillovers. So inventors need to be compensated for their innovation. Patent and monopoly rights exist today to ensure the continuation of innovation. So firms that invest in new ideas to produce the good need temporary monopoly rights to allow them enough time to recover their costs and make profits. And now let's talk a bit about scale and population. So population growth leads to more ideas, which leads to more technology, and this leads to sustained economic growth. So do we have empirical data to measure ideas? Well, research and development (R&D) is an important input in the production of ideas. Patents can also be used to measure idea generation. However, patents are expensive, so a lot of ideas have never been patented. For example, the Coca-Cola formula. It's a trade secret. The number of researchers has been rising over time in several countries, and more labor has been shifting into the R&D sector over time in several countries. So now we move on to Romer's growth model with chapter 5. So let's take a look at the basic elements of the Romer model. So the production function is as follows. So yt is equal to kat multiplied by ALY to the power of 1 minus a. K obviously being capital and Ly being the number of workers producing output. So the total workforce LT is equal to Lyt plus LRT. Ly being the number of workers producing output and LR being the number of workers in research and development. And the share of workers engaged in R&D is represented by SR. SR being equal to LR divided by LT. So the number of workers in R&D divided by the total workforce. Therefore, LR is equal to SR multiplied by L. So then the share of workers in the output sector is therefore defined as 1 minus SR, so it's a ratio. So you can therefore rewrite the production function as YT equals to KAT multiplied by AT multiplied by 1 minus SR multiplied by L to the power of 1 minus A. So GDP is a function of capital share, technology or R&D, and labor. And then the capital accumulation equation is the same. So DK is equal to SY minus DK. And labor also grows at a constant rate. So LT is equal to L0 multiplied by E to the power of GLT. But now, Romer introduces a production function for the accumulation of new ideas. So here, dA is equal to theta multiplied by LRT to the power of lambda multiplied by AT to the power of phi. So dA is the change in stock of ideas. Theta is the rate at which researchers are discovering new ideas. LRT to the power of lambda is the number of people in R&D discovering new ideas. And then AT to the power of phi is the initial or existing stock of ideas in the economy. But let's take a deeper look at these parameters lambda and phi. So lambda is some parameter between 0 and 1. If lambda is equal to 1, doubling researchers doubles the flow of new ideas. If lambda is less than 1, there's a duplication of ideas, so stepping on toes effect. And then if phi is larger than 0, the productivity of research increases with existing ideas already in the economy. So this is the standing on giants' shoulders effect. But then if phi is less than 0, it's difficult to improve on or come up with new ideas from the stock of ideas already in the economy. And then if phi is equal to 0, new research is independent of old ideas already in the economy. But now let's take a look at growth in the Romer model. So we take a look at the rate of technological progress along the balanced growth path. So here, GA is equal to dA divided by AT, which is equal to theta multiplied by SR to the power of lambda multiplied by LT to the power of lambda divided by AT to the power of 1 minus phi. So GA is equal to dat Osar law. And we should also know that 1 minus phi multiplied by GA is equal to lambda multiplied by GL. And this equation implies that along the balanced growth path, the growth rate of the number of researchers is equal to the growth rate of the population, GL. And if this condition doesn't hold, then the number of researchers will eventually exceed the population, which is impossible. So GASS, the growth rate of technology in the steady state, is equal to lambda divided by 1 minus phi multiplied by GL, the growth rate of the population. Therefore, we find that the long-run growth rate is determined by the parameters of the production function for new new ideas, so lambda and phi, and the growth rate of researchers, which is given by the population growth rate, GL. So in order to generate exponential or sustained growth, the number of new ideas must be increasing over time. And this happens if the number of researchers is increasing, so more researchers means more ideas. So when taking a look at the dynamics of productivity growth, you'll have the growth rate on the y-axis and the ratio of labor to technology on the x-axis, so L lambda divided by a to the power of 1 minus phi. The growth rate of labor is a flat horizontal curve, and then the ratio of labor to technology is a straight line going upward. And the ratio rises to the left where it's below the growth rate of labor curve. And then the ratio falls to the right when it's above the growth rate of labor curve. So in Solow's model, a higher population growth rate reduces the level of output or GDP per capita along the balanced growth path. So more people meant that more capital was needed to keep the capital per worker constant, but capital runs into diminishing returns. But in Romer's model, higher population growth leads to more ideas. More ideas means more technology, and because ideas are non-rivalrous, they generate increasing returns to scale, which keeps capital and hence output rising. But now let's solve the model along the balanced growth path. So the GDP per capita along the balanced growth path, YTBGP, is initially equal to SI divided by GASS plus GL plus D, all to the power of A divided by 1 minus A, multiplied by 1 minus SR multiplied by AT. And this is where the production function for ideas is GASS is equal to theta multiplied by SR multiplied by LT to the power of lambda divided by AT to the power of 1 minus phi. So the growth rate of ideas in the steady state is equal to theta multiplied by the share of researchers multiplied by labor divided by technology. And then we make AT the subject, and then we find that AT is equal to theta multiplied by SR multiplied by LT to the power of lambda divided by GASS all to the power of 1 divided by 1 minus phi. So the stock of ideas AT is equal to theta multiplied by the share of researchers multiplied by the labor force divided by the growth rate of ideas in the steady state all to the power of 1 divided by 1 minus phi. And then we combine these two equations to solve the model along the balanced growth path. So finally, GDP per capita along the balanced growth path YTBGP is equal to SI divided by GASS plus GL plus D all to the power of A divided by 1 minus A multiplied by 1 minus SR multiplied by theta multiplied by SR divided by GASS all to the power of 1 divided by 1 minus phi multiplied by LT to the power of lambda divided by 1 minus phi. So the GDP per capita along the balanced growth path is equal to the savings rate divided by the growth rate of technology in the steady state plus the growth rate of labor and the depreciation rate multiplied by 1 minus the share of researchers multiplied by theta minus the share of researchers divided by the growth rate of ideas in the steady state multiplied by the labor force. So more researchers leads to more ideas, and that increases the productivity of the economy. Now let's take a look at the dynamics of an increase in SR, or the share of researchers. Well, this could be an increase in research subsidies or more researchers in the R&D sector. So we have the growth rate on the y-axis and the ratio of labor to technology on the x-axis. And then we have the idea production function going upward, which is represented by 1 minus phi multiplied by GA. Then we have a flat horizontal curve, which is the growth rate of labor, lambda multiplied by GL. And if there's an increase in the share of researchers, the idea production function will shift upward. And this will lead to a decrease in the ratio of labor to technology in the steady state. So there are temporary growth effects, but we'll have a higher stock of ideas in the long run. But now let's talk a bit about the Romer economy. So the Romer economy is made up of 3 sectors: the final goods sector, the intermediate sector, and the research sector. The final goods sector consists of a large number of perfectly competitive firms that combine labor and capital goods to produce output. And so Y output is equal to Ly to the power of 1 minus A with the integral xj to the power of A multiplied by dj from 0 to A. And the ideas A are already incorporated into the capital good X supplied by the intermediate sector. And like any firm operating under perfect competition, they want to maximize their profits where wages W are equal to the marginal product of labor MPL and the rental price of capital R is equal to the MPK, marginal product of capital. So the price should be equal to the marginal cost, which should be equal to the marginal revenue. And so wages W is equal to 1 minus A multiplied by Y divided by Ly. Then the price of the good Pj is equal to A multiplied by Ly to the power of 1 minus A multiplied by xj to the power of a minus 1. Then we move on to the intermediate goods sector. This consists of the monopolist firms that produce the capital goods that are sold to the final goods sector. These firms gain their monopoly power by purchasing the design which is patent protected from the research sector. So only one firm manufactures each capital good. And here we have the profit maximization problem. So pi is equal to px minus rx. Then the real interest rate divided by the price is equal to 1 plus px divided by xp. And with that being the elasticity of demand. And then ultimately the price charged by the intermediate firm is a markup over the marginal cost. So P is equal to 1 divided by A multiplied by R. We have imperfect competition in this sector because of the monopolist firms, so the price is larger than the marginal cost. And then we move on to the research sector. This is where researchers are free to engage in the discovery of new ideas. And the incentive is that 1 or 2 ideas will be sold to the intermediate goods sector to be produced into a capital good, which will be sold to the final goods sector to be used in the production of output. Entrepreneurs or potential firms evaluate whether it's worth investing in the fixed cost of R&D, so FT. If the present discounted value of operating profits, VT, is large enough, they'll do the research and enter the market. In equilibrium, entry continues until firms are indifferent to entry, so VT is equal to FT. So the present discounted value of operating profits is equal to the fixed cost of research and development. And the equation states the following: pi t divided by r minus g pi explains the profits gained from research and development. And this is equal to wt multiplied by lrt divided by dA. And this explains the costs incurred in research and development. And you should know that when we solve for the share of labor in R&D in relation to the share of labor in the output sector, we find that SR divided by 1 minus SR is equal to A multiplied by 1 minus A divided by 1 minus A multiplied by GA divided by R minus GL. And this tells us that if the growth rate of ideas, GA, is high, then more firms are willing to hire people to do research. Therefore, the economic intuition is that the faster the economy grows, given by a higher GA, the higher the fraction of the population that works in R&D. And the higher the fraction of researchers, the higher the economic growth. So now we take a look at technology diffusion and globalization with Chapter 7. So development accounting is the procedure that accounts for the inputs of production that are most relevant for differences in GDP per capita across countries. And the production function is given as y is equal to k to the power of a multiplied by the product of a, h, and l to the power of 1 minus a. So y is equal to kali to the power of 1 minus a. So output is determined by physical capital, technology, human capital, and labor. And we should know hi, human capital, is equal to e to the power of mu multiplied by big EI. Mu is how valuable each year is in generating human capital, and big EI is the number of years of education of the average worker. So the equation is HIE, and we can arrange the production function to y is equal to k divided by a, h, and l to the power of a multiplied by a, h, and l. So y is equal to kali to the power of a multiplied by ali. And from there we let the total population be denoted by ni and divide the production function by the population to get the GDP per capita. So small y, GDP per capita, is equal to k divided by y to the power of a divided by 1 minus a multiplied by a times hi multiplied by li divided by ni. So the GDP per capita is equal to ki to the power of a divided by 1 minus a multiplied by alini. And then we can divide this equation with values we get from the USA. So you divide every variable with the same variable but with values for the US. And with this we can conduct an accounting exercise of the differences in GDP per capita across countries, using the US as the baseline comparison. But now let's take a look at a model of diffusion. So this builds on Romer's model, but we add an avenue for technology transfer. We endogenize the ability to use technology, intermediate capital goods. So big YT output is equal to h multiplied by l to the power of 1 minus a multiplied by the product of x to the power of a jt multiplied by dj, which is an integral from 0 to d, ht being human capital and dt being the amount of domestic technology. X to the power of a jt is the range of capital goods. So countries produce output yt using labor, human capital, and a range of capital goods. The number of capital goods that workers can use depend not only on their skill level, HT, but also on the amount of domestic technology, DT, that is diffused to a country from the technological frontier. Workers with high skill levels can use more capital goods with domestic technology than workers with a low skill level. This model is best applied to a single economy rather than the whole world. We assume we're examining the economic performance of a small country that's far from the technological frontier. This country grows by learning to use more advanced capital goods that are already available. Therefore, the total quality of capital goods used in production is equal to the total supply of raw materials. The production function for the economy takes Cobb-Douglas form. So output YT is equal to K to the power of A multiplied by the product of dt, ht, and lt to the power of 1 minus a. So y is equal to cadilt to the power of 1 minus a. And we should know dt is the index of domestic technology used in the economy. It's similar to at. The capital accumulation equation remains the same, so dk is equal to sk minus dk. And the population growth assumption stays the same. There's a constant growth rate of labor. We also assume that human capital is fixed, so ht is equal to h. And then the equation describing how domestic technology accumulates over time is dd, so small d multiplied by big D, is equal to psi multiplied by h multiplied by at to the power of gamma multiplied by dt to the power of 1 minus gamma. And we should know psi is the rate of diffusion of ideas or technology, at is the technology frontier, and gamma is the rate at which technology increases. So dd is equal to psi had. So domestic technology accumulates over time because of the following: the rate at which diffusion of ideas or technology is taking place, psi, the human capital level of the economy, h, and the higher the human capital, the faster the diffusion of ideas. It's also because of the amount of technology from the frontier available in the economy, so at to the power of gamma, and the country's initial or current level of domestic technology, so d to the power of 1 minus gamma. And remember, gamma is the rate at which technology increases in the economy. And so a higher A implies that there are more ideas out there to borrow, copy, purchase, or adopt, and that this makes it easier to find some ideas that'll diffuse into the country. So D accounts for the possibility that as the technology level increases, it can make further diffusion easier. So now let's analyze the steady state. So the growth rate of domestic technology along the balanced growth path is GD is equal to psi multiplied by H multiplied by AT divided by DT multiplied by gamma. And we should know the further behind the technology frontier, the faster the growth rate of domestic technology, because there's many frontier ideas to choose from and many may not have IPs or patents protecting them. And then the closer to the technological frontier, the slower the growth rate of domestic technology. It gets difficult to find new ideas to adopt, and the remaining new ones may still have IP protections. And we should know in the steady state, GA is equal to GD, so the growth rate of ideas or technology is equal to the growth rate of domestic technology. And we should know DT is equal to psi multiplied by H divided by GA multiplied by 1 divided by gamma multiplied by AT. So dt is equal to psi gayat. And then when solving for the steady state, the GDP per capita along the balanced growth path is equal to SI divided by GA plus GL plus D to the power of A divided by 1 minus A multiplied by H multiplied by psi multiplied by H divided by GA to the power of 1 divided by gamma multiplied by AT. So the GDP is equal to C gald to the power of A divided by 1 minus A multiplied by H multiplied by psi gayat. So the GDP per capita increases with the level of domestic technology, which in turn grows at the rate of frontier technological progress and the level of skills of the economy. So on a graph, you'll have the growth rate on the y-axis and then the ratio between the technological frontier and domestic technology on the x-axis. The growth rate of ideas or the technological frontier is a flat horizontal curve, and then the positive linear curve is the growth rate of domestic technology. And where they intersect represents the steady state. And so when GA is larger than GD, the ratio of A over D is rising. And when GD is larger than GA, the ratio is falling. So individuals in developed countries have invested a lot of time over the years in learning how to use advanced capital goods, while individuals in developing countries have invested less time. But now let's talk about technology transfer and IP. So for technology to trickle down or diffuse to poor countries, the necessary skills must be in place because investment in multinational companies may require the use of advanced technology, and the tech transfer also raises property rights issues. Developed economies create technologies that have high-skilled labor in mind, which means developing economies which tend to have low-skilled labor don't implement property rights. They can only imitate those technologies and therefore don't use those technologies to their full potential. However, if developing economies commit to protection of property rights, then they may find it worthwhile to develop technologies for the level of skills in their developing economies. But now let's take a look at globalization and trade. So we can further extend the simple model of development and growth to capture the role of globalization or openness. So adopting foreign technologies requires a country to be open for trade. And the primary change to the model is in the production function. So yt is equal to h multiplied by l to the power of 1 minus a multiplied by x to the power of a jt multiplied by dj, which is an integral from 0 to dt plus mt. So a country not only grows as it adopts new technologies domestically, increasing dt, it also grows by expanding the number of goods it imports, so increasing MT. MT can also be foreign direct investment, for example, multinational companies opening factories in other countries. And then capital goods can therefore be expressed as KT is equal to X multiplied by DT plus MT. And if we combine it with the production function, then YT is equal to K to the power of A multiplied by D, H, and L all to the power of 1 minus A multiplied by 1 plus MT divided by DT to the power of 1 minus A. So YT is equal to cattle to the power of 1 minus A multiplied by 1 plus MD to the power of 1 minus A. But now let's solve for the steady state to get the GDP per capita along the balanced growth path. So the GDP per capita along the balanced growth path is equal to SI divided by GA plus GL plus D to the power of A divided by 1 minus A multiplied by H multiplied by psi and H divided by GA to the power of 1 divided by gamma multiplied by 1 plus MT divided by DT multiplied by AT. So the GDP per capita is equal to C to the power of A divided by 1 minus A multiplied by H multiplied by Siga to the power of 1 divided by gamma multiplied by 1 plus MD at. Therefore, countries that grow, invest in physical capital, spend more time accumulating skills such that they can use or adopt advanced technology domestically and from abroad. They are more open so they can import more intermediate goods, and they have increasing levels of technology. If MT equals to 0, then a country is a closed economy, and we're back at the initial steady state equation for the simple model of development. Countries with higher trade as a share of GDP have higher GDP per capita. Policies or the choices that societies make that increase investments in skill accumulation or education can impact on the steady state of an economy. Now we move on to social infrastructure with Chapter 8. So a business investment problem is how do business managers decide whether to undertake investing in a foreign country? Well, they can do a cost-benefit analysis, calculate the total cost, total benefits, and if the benefits are larger, then invest. So setting up a business involves a one-time setup cost, F. For example, business licenses, plant location, equipment and machinery, etc. And then once the business is set up, it generates a profit, V. So this is the present discounted value of the profit stream or expected profit each year such that the business remains operational. So if V is larger than F, then you should invest. And if V is less than F, then don't invest. And we should know there's variation in the cost of setting up businesses and in the ability of investors to gain profits from their investments. These variations arise from differences in policies and institutions, so social infrastructure. A good government provides institutions and social infrastructure that minimizes F and maximizes V, creating incentives for investment. Such variations can explain differences in investment rates, educational attainment, and total factor productivity between countries. But now let's take a look at the determinants of F. So this could be anti-growth policies, corruption, bureaucratic red tape, for example bribes, etc., how long it takes to set up a company, and countries with weak institutions or poor social infrastructure tend to suffer more from corruption. But now let's take a look at the determinants of profit, V. So this could be the size and scale of the market, how many people you're selling to, the stability of the economic environment, so creating a situation where firms and individuals feel safe in investing encourages investments, Countries where rules and regulations keep changing frequently may not encourage investments due to the high risk involved. And then wars and revolutions are extreme forms of instability. And then another determinant is production over diversion. So the extent to which institutions in an economy favor production instead of diversion has a positive impact on investments. So social infrastructure that favors production encourages people to engage in the creation and transaction of goods and services. The population has incentives to be productive, and diversion corresponds to illegal rent-seeking activities such as corruption, vested interest, and confiscatory taxation. Diversion discourages people from investing because it reduces investors' returns, so this leads to a decrease in investment in capital, human capital, and foreign direct investment. So economic institutes go hand in hand with political institutions. The government makes and enforces laws that provide the framework for economic transactions in the economy. Social infrastructure also influences the type of investments that are taken. For example, in a country with high crime, that invest in more security. So the business investment framework predicts that countries that attract investments in the form of capital, technology transfer, and skill development will be countries where institutions favor production over diversion and misallocation. The economy is open to international trade and global competition, and economic institutions are stable. Countries with good social infrastructure tend to have higher investments in both physical and human capital. Social infrastructure can be a reason for skilled labor migrating from poor countries to rich ones. In developed economies, skilled labor can earn the full return on their skills, whereas in developing economies, their skill is wasted by diversionary activities, and they stand the risk of having the benefits of their skills expropriated. Let's talk a bit about misallocation and productivity. So social infrastructure can lower total factor productivity by misallocating labor and capital in the economy. Two economies can have similar capital and labor but have different development paths because of the economic environments in which the production processes take place. For example, in one economy, capital may be used to fend off crime or bribe public officials, but in another, all capital may be used for productive activities. Now we move on to population and the origin of sustained economic growth with Chapter 9. So two conflicting effects of population are presented so far. It's first negative in the Solow model. More people means spreading capital across more workers. And then it's positive in Romer's or Schumpeter's model. More people means more ideas or innovations. So another possible negative effect is the Malthusian model. Increases in population given a fixed supply of natural resources, for example land, lowers living standards. Up to now, models have presumed that population, L, grows at an exogenous rate. So now endogenous population growth is now incorporated in the model of economic growth, linking fertility decisions to the income level. In addition, a fixed stock of resources, like land, allows for Malthusian dynamics in the model. So increasing population lowers living standards. And the model provides an explanation for transitions from stagnation, so low income and low growth, to sustained growth, high income and high growth. So if we take a look at the human development eras, the Malthusian era had low population growth rates and low income growth. Little effort was spent accumulating human capital, with education limited to a very small class of individuals. And then in the post-Malthusian era, so 1800-ish to 1920, both population and income growth accelerate. Higher population growth rates don't lead to lower standards of living, but there's still low human capital accumulation. And then we have the modern growth era, so 1920 to now. So there's continued income growth, but there's a demographic transition. We're shifting from high birth and infant death rates to low birth and death rates, so smaller families and falling population growth rates. And human capital accumulation is increasing. Technological progress is also increasing. But now let's take a look at the Malthusian economy. So we have a fixed factor production function that replaces physical capital stock, KT, with a fixed factor, stock of land, X. So yt is equal to x to the power of beta multiplied by the product of at to the power of 1 divided by 1 minus beta and lt all to the power of 1 minus beta. A obviously being the level of technology and LT being the size of the population. So YT is equal to ZAL to the power of 1 minus beta. And then you can simplify it to get the output per worker, or the GDP per capita. So small YT is equal to AT multiplied by X divided by L to the power of beta. So small YT is equal to AXL to the power of B. And we should know the GDP per capita and labor are inversely related. So as you increase population given a fixed supply of land, people become more crowded, reducing everyone's output. If L, the population or labor, continues to grow infinitely, output per capita will eventually be driven to zero. The Malthusian model assumes population growth increases with income per capita. So we can represent this Malthusian population process as GL is equal to V multiplied by small yt minus C bar. So GL is equal to vice. And this is where C bar is a subsistence level of consumption, and V is a parameter governing the response of population growth to income. So at very low levels of income, food is scarce and nutrition is poor. Families have trouble conceiving and infant mortality is high. So population growth is low. And then as income rises, families have more food available, and the capacity to have children and keep them alive through childhood improves. So population growth is high. So population growth can be negative, and this is if GDP per capita is small and incomes are below subsistence level and families don't have enough surviving children to replace parents. So population declines. And so GL, the population growth, is equal to V multiplied by A multiplied by X divided by L to the power of beta minus V multiplied by C bar. So GL is equal to Vaxel B minus VC. So population growth is negatively related to the size of the population. So when taking a look at the dynamics of the Malthusian model, we have the growth rate on the y-axis and the ratio of technology and the stock of land to labor on the x-axis. So the growth rate of technology, GA, is a flat horizontal curve, and then the curve going upward is the growth rate of labor, GL. And where they intersect gives us the steady state ratio of technology and stock of land to labor. So when the growth rate of labor is less than the growth rate of technology, the ratio is rising. And when population growth, GL, is larger than the growth rate in technology, then the ratio is falling. Now let's solve for the steady state where GYSS is equal to 0 and GLSS is equal to GA. So in the steady state, the growth rate of GDP per capita is equal to 0 and the growth rate of labor is equal to the growth rate of technology. So GL, the growth rate of labor, and GA, the growth rate of technology, is equal to V multiplied by A multiplied by X divided by L all to the power of beta minus V multiplied by C bar. So GL is equal to GA, which is equal to Vaxel B minus VC. And then we further simplify this to A multiplied by X divided by L in the steady state is equal to GA divided by V plus C bar all to the power of 1 divided by beta. So Axel is equal to GAV-C to the power of 1 divided by beta. And if we solve for steady state population, LT is equal to A multiplied by X multiplied by V divided by GA multiplied by V plus C all to the power of 1 divided by beta. So LT is equal to X multiplied by VGAV-C to the power of 1 divided by beta. So the steady state of the population is proportional to the amount of land, X, and positively related to the technology level, AT. Larger land areas are capable of supporting larger populations. Higher technology is capable of supporting more people on the same area of land. It makes fixed resources more efficient or productive. The greater the subsistence level, C bar, the smaller the steady state population. So the model implies that if the GDP per capita increases, fertility or population growth will also increase. However, with fixed land and technology, an increasing number of people lowers GDP per capita. So whenever an economy has relatively high living standards, fertility rates rise and the economy eats away at its own prosperity. And this is the dismal science. Though Malthus didn't take into account technological progress, so technological progress comes from population size. But what is the virtuous cycle or endogeneity? Well, it says increases in technology generate higher population growth, which in turn generates higher technology, and the cycle continues. So at low levels of income per capita, there's a positive relationship between population growth and income. But now let's look at explaining continuing increases in income and lower population growth. So the mechanism for transitioning from stagnation to sustained growth is the steady increase in population size and technology. So on a graph, you'll have the growth rate on the y-axis and the GDP per capita on the x-axis. And then the growth rate of technology is a flat horizontal curve, and then the growth rate of labor is a curve going up, reaches a peak, and then goes down. So initially, the economy is in Malthusian stagnation where population growth increases with income levels. And then a sufficient large shock to GDP per capita causes the economy to jump from a new steady state where population growth decreases with increases in income. So as long as technological progress, GA, is larger than population growth, GL, then the economy is freed from Malthusian steady state and continues to have an increasing income per capita. So now we move on to natural resources and economic growth with Chapter 10. Here we investigate the effect of a finite supply of land and non-renewable natural resources on economic growth. So we augment the Solow model with non-renewable resources such as oil, coal, natural gas, and gold, etc. So the production function is given by yt is equal to k to the power of a multiplied by e to the power of beta multiplied by the product of a and l to the power of 1 minus alpha minus beta. And this exhibits constant returns to scale. So yt is equal to kl to the power of 1 minus a minus b. So at is exogenous technology and et is the energy input in production. But now let's take a look at the accumulation of resources over time. So dRt is equal to negative et, so it's drit. So RT is the approved stock of available non-renewable energy resources. And then R0 is the initial stock of this resource. And when we use some E amount of this resource, it depletes the stock. So GR, the growth rate of resources, is equal to D multiplied by RT divided by RT, which is equal to negative SE. So GR is equal to dritC. And this implies that the total stock of energy used in production is depleting over time at the rate of the energy used, SE. And on the balanced growth path, Y is equal to K to the power of A multiplied by the product of B and L all to the power of 1 minus alpha. So Y is equal to KBL to the power of 1 minus A. And BT is a function of efficient production, AT, and resource use per person, so ET divided by LT. So ET over LT implies that population growth may lower productivity by diluting resources, and the growth rate of output per worker along the balanced growth path is GB. So GYSS, the growth rate of GDP per capita in the steady state, is equal to GB, which is equal to 1 minus beta divided by 1 minus alpha multiplied by GA minus beta divided by 1 minus A multiplied by SE plus GL. And so the growth rate of GB is a mix of the growth rate of actual productivity, GA, a drag on growth from the depletion of resources, SE, and the growth rate of the population, GL. The equation shows that faster population growth combined with finite resource stock reduces growth. An increase in the depletion rate, SE, reduces the long-run growth rate of the economy. Resources are used up more quickly, leaving a smaller resource stock and therefore lower output. When including the stock of fixed resources, X, such as land, the equation becomes Y is equal to K to the power of A multiplied by E to the power of beta multiplied by X to the power of gamma multiplied by the product of A and L to the power of 1 minus alpha minus beta minus gamma. So Y is equal to Kexel to the power of 1 minus ABY. So GYSS, the growth rate of GDP per capita in the steady state, is equal to 1 minus beta plus gamma divided by 1 minus alpha multiplied by GA minus beta divided by 1 minus alpha multiplied by SE minus beta plus gamma divided by 1 minus alpha multiplied by GL. So GYSS is equal to 1 minus Bayega minus base minus Bayagol. So the long-run growth rate depends on the technological progress, and there's a drag from the depletion of non-renewables as well as a drag from spreading resources across more people. But then what is the growth drag? Well, this is the amount by which growth is reduced because of the population pressure, GL, on the finite stock of resources, gamma, and the depletion of stock of non-renewable resources, SE. So to quantify the value of the growth drag, we need values for the parameters alpha, beta, and gamma, and the depletion rate, SE. And Nardis assumes in a competitive economy, A is equal to 0.2, beta is equal to 0.1, and gamma is equal to 0.1, and SE is equal to 0.005. But now let's take a look at price as a predictor of scarcity. If non-renewable resources are becoming more scarce or they're becoming depleted, we should see an increase in their prices. While the price of energy is increasing, it's not as high as we'd expect given the increase in total energy use or demand. So people are using up more resources, so there's higher demand, yet the prices of non-renewable resources aren't increasing as quickly. So it indicates that natural resources aren't becoming scarce over time, and maybe it's because we're using more renewables. And so the constant elasticity of supply, the CES production function, may explain the substitution of non-renewable resources with renewable ones. So YT is equal to a function of capital and energy, which is equal to K to the power of P plus A multiplied by E to the power of P all to the power of 1 divided by P. So Y is equal to Cape to the power of 1 divided by P. For example, we can substitute coal with solar energy. And AT, technological progress, is part of the model, which implies implies the technologies become better over time and it offsets the decreasing returns as a result of the drag. And then in terms of growth in the environment, there's a non-linear trade-off between producing goods and services and the damage we do to the environment by using resources to provide those goods. Initially, as the economy grows, emissions are high because we're producing with old technologies. But as the economy continues to grow, we adopt newer and better methods of production with less emissions. And so empirical evidence shows the prediction of the CES model is correct.